So, earlier this week there was a press conference and President-elect Trump was giving his talking and all that, when suddenly a reporter from CNN tried to ask him a question. Donald Trump was like, "No, I'm not going to answer your question," and the reporter kept trying to ask him. And then Trump was like, "No, mate, you're being rude." And then he said, "You're fake news," and that was it, and he moved on to someone else.
Yeah, the reporter kind of reminded me of one of those door-to-door salesmen that just keep going until you buy their product.
Actually, have you ever seen that video where there's a guy who's trying to cancel his Comcast subscription, and the Comcast guy just keeps going?
Yeah.
Yeah, that dude was like, what's that battery bunny that y'all talk about all the time?
The Energizer Bunny?
Yeah, mate, the Energizer Bunny. That reporter just kept going like the Energizer Bunny, except he wasn't nearly as cute.
Yeah. Honestly, I was surprised that he didn't get kicked out.
Right, well, anyways, the big question that we want to ask is the whole fake news trend starting to backfire on, well, how shall we say this? Basically, the entire club of elitists who seemingly were trying to use that label in an attempt to delegitimize any competition that their pro-establishment mainstream media outlets might have.
Well, first, let's give some backstory. So after the election, there was this incident where some random dude walked into a restaurant in DC, fired off his gun, and then started ranting about some fake news story that he heard. After all this happened, Hillary Clinton came out and said that we as a country need to confront and stop fake news. There was also some mentioning on Facebook and other social media cracking down on pages that support fake news, and it goes on from there.
A lot of people think that George Soros and his DNC friends had something to do with creating the fake news narrative to censor political opposition to the establishment. Some people even believe that the guy who walked into the pizza shop and fired the gun was an actor, citing how someone on IMDb, or however you say that, has some first, last, and middle name that was the exact same as the guy who did the pizza thing. Personally, I can't verify any of this with any conclusiveness, for sure, but I think George Soros is at least worth a mention.
George Soros?
Right, George Soros is like, this really powerful guy who's a friend of Hillary Clinton. He's also considered to be one of the top elite in the financial industry, with a lot of behind-the-scenes influence in both the media and the DNC. He also apparently had some files leaked about him from WikiLeaks, about him paying people to start riots at Trump rallies. And he's got a lot of powerful sketchiness to him. Anyways, the whole fake news trend that was being pushed by Hillary Clinton came out shortly after he had this closed-door meeting in Washington, D.C. with a lot of top officials on how they could stop Trump after Trump won the election. The issue that people started having with this is that it potentially could be a mask for censoring free speech and delegitimizing opposing media.
Right. I do think that there are definitely some issues with fake news being spread around, but wouldn't the overt bias of mainstream media also make them guilty of fake news as well? I mean, pretty much everyone could be fake news depending on how you look at it.
Well, in this case, we're talking about entirely made-up stories, not just bias.
Yeah, I get that, but sometimes I think bias can be heavy enough where it may as well be a made-up story just because it's so slanted. I mean, everyone is always going to have some sort of a slant, I get that, but some of the stuff that I've heard from both independent and mainstream news organizations is just embarrassing.
Right. Now, wasn't there a more specific reason why Trump was mad at CNN?
Apparently CNN and BuzzFeed propagated some crazy story about Trump and Russia and a lot of other weird stuff.
So it was a legitimate fake news issue coming from a mainstream media outlet, right? And BuzzFeed. I don't know what you consider BuzzFeed.
Pretty much.
Right, well, regardless, the whole fake news thing is just a disaster waiting to happen. It really would just end up like some sort of chaotic free-for-all with everyone calling each other fake news, which is pretty much what is happening now. Now, that isn't to say that some organizations are much worse than others, and that some are, just complete rubbish. But, as it's been said by many others as well, it really is just a slippery slope, and it's the reason why we have a First Amendment.
Also, I think Hillary Clinton is one of the worst people that could start a campaign against fake news.
How's that, mate?
Well, at least part of the reason why she lost the election had a lot to do with all the crazy information that was released about her through WikiLeaks. And the vast majority of those doing most of the reporting on that info were smaller independent news organizations, which would probably get most of the heat from a campaign set out to take down fake news. I mean, the mainstream media more or less seemed like they were trying to ignore the WikiLeaks stuff when it came out. Or at least they were trying to heavily downplay it. That's what it seemed like. So it kind of makes it look like she's trying to use the whole fake news narrative to take down the only people who are being honest enough to report the dirty truth on her, the DNC, and pretty much the whole establishment. Meanwhile, CNN seems to love the establishment.
Well, overall, the whole fake news trend seemed like it was supposed to be one of those things that would latch onto a very specific group of people to delegitimize them to the point where they were no longer relevant. But now, it seems like a lot of these independent news organizations, and even just people in general, are taking that term and throwing it right back at the pro-establishment mainstream media. And it's either working, or it's just dampening the effectiveness of the term fake news altogether, since everyone is calling everyone fake news. And I'm pretty sure neither of which were the hopeful outcomes that Hillary Clinton and her friends had for it. So yes, I would say that, at least to some degree, the whole fake news trend has backfired on its creators. So, if you would like more fake news, please hit the subscribe button. I'm kidding, but not about the subscribe button. Crocky die.